Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 130th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest. Sameena Choudry has at long last joined us, because we've tried to arrange this for a couple of times, but things have defeated us. But welcome, Sameena.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you. I know that I'm sort of impressed by the work you've been doing, and somebody from a cooperative background, there's so much cooperation, the principles of cooperation in your thinking and in your work. But anyway, how are you, Stan?
I'm fine, Frank. But how are you? Because you had a chest infection last time.
I did. Had some antibiotics and it got rid of it. But now Mrs. Norris has got it, and this is the first illness in our 42-year marriage where she's had to go to the doctors. So yeah, she's got this chest infection.
It's the first time you've had to look after her in 42 years.
Well, do you know what?
Better be good, Frank.
Can I just say, I've managed to keep the show on the road for 3 days. I am, I'm so impressed with myself. But I'm keeping that to myself, and now I'm sharing it more widely. But no, I think also the family rely heavily on Arlene to do a lot of stuff around Christmas, and she's getting anxious now that she's not going to be as ready as she'd want to be. But I managed to get the Christmas decorations up yesterday, and I think they got approval. So I was quite impressed with myself. Things aren't quite in the place where they normally go, but everything's out and it looks Christmassy.
Frank, the secret is always to take a photograph of everything. So you look back over your pictures to last year, make sure everything's back where it was.
Oh dear. Anyway, yeah.
I think though, Frank, I think there's a program there to find out how Mrs. Norris has managed to avoid the doctors for 42 years. Well, I think that's lots of people want to hear about that.
I think, Sameena, it is. It runs in the family. She's got a sort of Indian heritage, and there was something about not overeating and it's funny, eating slowly. Her father was ate very, very slowly, so he would have a very small portion, and he would be the last one to leave the table, and also eating healthily and being reasonably active. I think all of that, I've benefited greatly from that, and I think that's why she's avoided it, I think. But also she's one of those that I'm going to see myself through this. I'm not going to let it defeat me.
Keeps going. Fights back.
She's remarkable. But I think the pressure has built. The family have been onto her, from every quarter. So she's relented today. So anyway, Sameena, there may be some people here who have no idea who you are. So do you want to just give a little outline of your career and what you're interested in?
Yes, I've started off in secondary education in Sheffield. Did a number of roles in Sheffield. So I'm based in Yorkshire. I actually worked in a college, done teacher training at Sheffield Hallam University. I've also worked for the local authority, and that's where I started working cross-phase. So like I said, 18 years in Sheffield initially, in lots of different roles. Very fortunate that it was sort of the late 80s, and there were lots of opportunities to cross-fertilise and do new roles. I think it'd be harder to do that nowadays. Then I worked as a head of service in North Lincolnshire for 5 years. Wow. 3 years in Leeds as a senior advisor.
Putting us to shame here.
And then I went back and did quite a bit of work in North Lincolnshire as part of my consultancy, because I set up my own consultancy. And then I for the last 3 and a bit years, I've been working in Doncaster Local Authority as a senior advisor as well. And I think when I was in Sheffield, I had the opportunity to train for Ofsted as well. That was in 2003, many frameworks ago. But that was when you went in as a team for five days as a subject specialist, which I probably think was the right way to do things at that particular
You know.
point. I know it's very expensive, but it was a really good way of getting subject specialists in who knew the role and what was expected, but also you had the time to do it properly as well.
And also, you're an author.
I am an author, yes. So
Who would have thought?
basically,
Did you ever think you would be an author?
I have been writing
Right.
articles on and off, and chapters in books, and a few articles probably about 5 years ago for um, like Schools Week and Times Educational Supplement. I found that actually harder than writing the book, because trying to get everything in that you want to say in 700 words or so is not the easiest
No.
thing to do. So I think it was a natural progression then from writing chapters to actually sitting down and writing the book. And my publishers actually approached me. They'd seen some of the work that I'd done and heard me speaking at one of the conferences, and so they commissioned me to write the book. And it was something that I've been meaning to do for the last 10 years, but I just needed that sort of incentive to actually sit down and write it. So yes,
So
thank
the
you.
theme of this is it's called Equitable Education, isn't it? And
It is.
so just explain a little bit about why you went down that route.
Yeah, I think right from the outset, when I went into teaching, it was very much about the difference that teachers in schools make to the lives of children and young people. And all the book is basically a culmination of the research evidence that I had come across and done as part of my own personal development, as well as the qualifications that I had achieved. And it was based on the advice that I was giving senior leaders latterly, because that's been most of my work, and obviously teacher training and so on. And the same recurring themes were coming across, so it just made sense to put that into a book and have it in one place, rather than having lots of PowerPoint modules here and there. And yeah, so I think and a lot of it is based on my personal experience of working with schools. And I do have case studies in the book, and they're all based on either children, young people that I've taught, or that we've been using as case studies to address in terms of improving standards and outcomes for
I
these young
think
people.
I found it easier to talk to senior leaders. I mean, did this on an executive leaders course where I spoke about 2 weeks ago, where you talk about the term equity, and you actually ask people, what do you understand by the term equity? And actually, they find it really difficult to explain what that actually means and what the difference between that and equality is. And I think
Indeed.
the thing for me was that giving people, it's as if this is a bit of the sort of a bit of training or development that has simply not really had much focus, because I think when they understand it, they then say, oh yeah, I get that, but actually I don't think I can make that work.
Yeah.
There are
And
too
it is
many
hard.
there are too
It
many
is hard.
things, both in the accountability framework, but also in
Yeah.
their sort of upbringing and their training, to actually sort of tackle. You really do need to unpick quite a lot of stuff to
Yeah.
commit to equity, don't you?
In leadership, Frank, we used to say
Yeah.
treating people the same isn't necessarily treating them fairly. And that was like, you could see people saying, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I treat all my staff the same. Yeah, but that might not be treating them fairly.
Yeah.
It's really hard for people to get their head around that's not equity. That just because you're saying, well, everybody gets the same,
Yeah.
it's not right.
No.
I think you're right, Stan, and I think there is a prevalence of equality of opportunity. Everybody has the same opportunities, but they don't. It's the barriers that impede the opportunity to access what is available. And I think for me, it's also, even moving on from equity, it's about social justice.
Yeah.
And that is, as you said, Frank, a really hard, people generally, there's very rarely people come across and say, no, I don't believe in the concept. It is about what practices and processes you need to have in school to enable that to happen. And that's why I wrote the book. So it's really about understanding the needs of the pupils that you've got in front of you in your school, in your context,
Yeah.
and understanding them and looking at it from their perspective rather than what you feel that they need. And it's turning it inside out. And I think for me, one of the fundamental things that I've learned from being in education for 30 plus years is very much that if we get it right for some of our vulnerable groups, then actually the education system, so we need to, would be much better, and we need to turn it inside out. We focus too much on everybody doing well. And I'm not saying that that isn't important, but we do know from the research that actually family background is really, really critical. And we do see these cases of families really supporting their children to get the best out of their education and other opportunities. However, if we really focus and really understand the needs of the children that we've got in our schools, that's where I think we can make a big difference. And actually listening to children, young people, and pupil voices getting better, but I think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. But also parental and community engagement, and
Yeah.
really hearing and listening to the parents. So it's a two-way process, not done two. Not that we are the experts and we know everything. Yes, we do have expertise and we should use that, but actually I think a bit of humility is sometimes needed, and genuine reaching out to those communities and understanding, living a day in the life of
I know.
some of our children, young people, would give us that absolute insight, rather than what we think in our lives and how we live, and then trying to transfer that
I think
across. And
the pandemic, one of the benefits of the pandemic was even in schools. Like I'm thinking of a school in a northern city, right in the centre of the city, that clearly has significant. The community is under considerable strain, economic strain, whatever it may be.
yes,
But actually, the pandemic, even though the staff felt they knew their pupils really well, the fact that they had to at times go out and visit the house, visit the home, directly
yes,
speak to
yeah,
parents, I think even for some of those staff it was a shock. Their
mm,
view of what the living conditions were like, the view of the support
yes,
or lack of that these
yeah,
children had, really sort of brought home that sort of social element of the purpose of schooling.
yes, yeah.
Even in the most trying of conditions, that it was a shock for
Yeah.
many to see what they were.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the first time many teachers and staff have actually had that insight. And then if you add to it, the fact that there was a lot of online teaching going on as well. And again, that was a window into some of our children's lives as well, wasn't it? That we wouldn't have had that insight, through a camera in that sense. I know it was about learning, but you do actually see bits of other dynamics taking place and the conditions that, children, young people may be living in as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I saw again. I can't reveal the school, but there was a school that I saw an Ofsted report of, which actually seemed to get a feel for what the circumstances of the community were. But also a similar report done at the same time where it was as if a group of inspectors had come in without really trying to get under the skin of the school. And
Yeah.
and somebody responded to a tweet I put out last week, saying that in effect, we do need Austin needs to have a completely sort of set standard about what is good and what isn't. And actually, I responded by saying, well, this isn't regulatory. This is actually about professional judgment, and those people who do inspections, need to have that sort of depth of understanding. And I'm really not sure that many of them do, because we all face our own reality from what we know and what we experience. We think we know what it's like,
Yeah.
but I don't think
Yeah.
some of them do, and that's where the variability in all of this, and why some of our communities in the most challenging of areas
Yeah.
really aren't properly supported.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my schools that I worked with probably 2 years ago now, in a town in the north, with a lot of social problems, but their induction into the school, into the nursery unit and then to reception, was stunningly good, in that 2 staff visited every home of every child that was coming and had a conversation in the home with the parents. their risk assessment was absolutely just, when, you know, I didn't visit the homes, but I read the risk assessment that had developed over the years on the experience they'd had, and it was frightening in a way that these kind of things happened. But the professionalism of the teachers and support staff who did this process was absolutely fantastic, and the information gained was shared then through the school. It was an outstanding school in a very poor area.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are these transition points. This is always making me think about, you know, preschool into mainstream school, into an early years setting, you know, within a school,
Yeah.
and then key stage 2 to key stage 3 and whatever, you know, that passing of the baton, you know, it makes all the difference, doesn't it? You know, I mean, if you do it properly and do it well, but you know, I don't know. It feels very fractured. You know, as when I when I was ahead, most of our kids went into one secondary school, and we were able to do sort of joint curriculum work. So I remember we did a project called Bubbles, and that was the second half of the summer term, and so the pupils took their books up from all the various primary schools that were feeding into this large secondary school, and of course, just a simple thing like taking your book up, actually for a secondary school teacher in year 7, it says a lot about the sort of standards that were being achieved in primary settings, as well as the quality of the work they were producing. But we can't even appear to do that. You know, it's as if in primary schools still the children take their books home at the end of the summer term in year 6, you know, when actually the most valuable bit of evidence a year 7 teacher could have is the work they were doing at the end of year 6.
Frank, I said last week I did some research, some reporting in Stoke, and the consistent part of their project was that they gave supply money for secondary schools for maths teachers to go into primaries, and the consistent feedback from every single high school subject leader that we spoke to was, we're having to change our curriculum because what they're doing in year 5 and 6 in the primary is ahead of what we're doing in year 7 and partly into year 8. Apart from some gaps which they identified, and you wouldn't be surprised to know things like measure and space, which are no longer being tested, so they're the ones that aren't done quite as well. But it was really refreshing to see these teachers and heads of maths saying, we need to rethink how we start in year 7 because we're just treading water and move it on.
See,
and I think there is that issue, isn't there, in key stage 3 of, you know, replication of stuff that children may have done in primary, but similarly where there are the gaps, they don't necessarily get picked up.
No.
But I also think it is really complex nowadays, as you've already said, you know, Frank. I think previously you'd had your natural feeder schools and you'd build those relationships and you'd do, you know, teaching both ways, you know, in an ideal sort of situation. But now, you know, when you do look at the secondary schools that we have, especially where I am, you know, most of them are academies, and they are pulling in children from really
wide areas.
Lots of primary schools. So it's quite a tricky situation for them to address. But that would, from a pupil's perspective, would make a big difference. I mean, one subject that I'm passionate about is languages, and I mean, we have nominally, I will say, because it's not very good, teaching of modern foreign languages in primary and upper key stage 2, and yet it's not taught very well in primary because you don't necessarily have the subject specialists. You don't do it earlier on, which is bonkers. We haven't got the teachers in primary, all of that sort of stuff. And then they go to secondary, and then depends very much on what, you know, language they teach. So you don't even get that continuity. So if you've got a child that's developed that passion, then all of a sudden you're knocking it on the head and then starting afresh, and then you wonder why we're not getting children doing more you know, modern languages at GCSE, because the whole system is fractured and not enabling that smooth journey. And personally, for me, I would want children to have the opportunity to study a range of languages so that they can in secondary then decide 2 or 3. You know, I mean, that's the norm in Europe and the rest of the world, but we're still, think, oh, languages is really hard, but we don't support the
No.
learning and teaching of languages at all in the England, education system at all. It's appalling. We've had times where things have been moving forward, but then similarly it's gone backwards in many ways.
A positive.
My experience is that if you're in a primary school and you remember French or Spanish from when you went to school, you become the coordinator,
Yes.
and that subject then becomes the school's modern foreign language, and the
Yeah.
high school may have decided that German is there, so there is no continuity whatsoever in
Yeah.
that gap. It's
So-
really worrying.
Some positive news is because actually we're over 20 minutes and we haven't got on to what's caught our eye this week. This happens all the time. But there were, I noticed an article this morning where some Ukrainian children who have been in the UK, in Wales actually for 11 weeks, are now fluent in Welsh. And it's funny, we visit North Wales quite a lot. So we go to a little museum called Penmaen Museum. And they that little village is accommodating 3 Ukrainian families, one of whom, the mother of one of the families, is working in the cafe in the museum, and she had sort of limited English, but her English has just come on immensely during that time, and she started on the Welsh as well. I mean, it's just immersing yourself, isn't it? At the end of the day.
It is, and actually, if you learn, one language, learning another or subsequent languages is much easier. And like I said, it's the norm in the rest of the world. It's just in England we have, obviously, because of the prevalence of English, but also we have got ingrained attitudes towards learning another language, when actually it is the most natural thing that is possible. Obviously, you need to put in good teaching and everything else to enable that to happen, particularly for academic purposes. But we're too resistant and have lots of sort of hang-ups about languages.
My son's really into he's actually learning Welsh at the moment.
Is he?
Yeah, because he did Japanese at secondary school and French, I think. He speaks a bit of Spanish because he's got Spanish relatives, and he was learning Italian. I think that was a period when he was into pizzas, but now he's so when we were in Wales recently, he bought the A-level Welsh book, and he's now learning well. The problem is he doesn't have anybody to have a conversation with, and it's conversational language that you need to learn.
A shout out for my brother Barry, who's been a guest here twice, and he was brought up in Basildon in Essex with me, but he was then appointed as a Welsh Estyn inspector, and one of the rules was you've got to be fluent in Welsh.
Yes.
So he's now fluent in Welsh and a published poet in Welsh as well. So if you really do want to do it, you can do it. If you've got to do it. And I found sort of when I left school and started working, my motivation levels to do stuff increased incredibly, because I felt as though I was going to actually benefit from this financially. My career was going to be enhanced. It wasn't just I've got to have a love of it because I want to pass my GCSEs, or in those days the O-level. It was about there's some hard cash at the end of this. Right, let's move on. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's very different from where we've just been. What's caught my eye this week is a shout out really to schools at Christmas and what they do to preserve Christmas traditions, and to, despite everything, make sure that the young people have a Christmas. And I'm talking schools of faith and schools of no faith. It's something I'm believe it to be a tradition rather than a religious activity in most cases. But in sort of getting the thing about Christmas carols, because I do like to hear. I'm not very good at singing, so I don't sing but I do like to listen to children singing.
You're a softie, aren't you, Stan?
I'm a
you're
romantic.
a softie for Silent Night and Away in America.
My children are in their late 30s and they still get a stocking. That's where we are. It's not that many years ago when it snowed at Christmas. I think the children were both adults then, I ran out of the back door, jumped as far as I could to leave footprints in the snow that faced the house
Oh.
in big boots, so I could
Wow.
say that. And they'll just look at you and go, "You're mad, aren't you?" But
Did you take a photo of that, Stan?
yes, I did.
Oh well,
I don't think I could find it.
Oh, I knew
I
that was
did.
coming.
Yeah, so yeah, I nearly broke my back as well by running out of the back door and trying to twist so you land facing the house again. Then I had to make the boots sizes a bit bigger. Clearly, Father Christmas has got bigger feet than I have. So yeah, and I just got, yeah, Dad, right.
But it's a tradition of it, isn't it? That's it. I think we talked about an anchor point, really.
Yeah, what I picked, having sort of just listened, having been in the governor's meet at the school to see that the children there are singing carol service in school, nativity in school, singing where the local village turns the Christmas lights on. I think they're at the church this weekend singing, and it's a lot of work for teachers to do all that in the current circumstances. But I then saw a piece in the Times about Christmas carols and how we've still got them, and it's a piece about Victorians who decided to collect songs from around the country on the fear that they would be lost, and Vaughan Williams was one who found a song called Forest Green, I think it's called, which he then fitted the words to "O Little Town of Bethlehem" to, and there's one of the classic Christmas carols. But when you then look at the dates of these things, 150 years old. Yeah. So the Christmas traditions that I think about and I think went on for hundreds of years, probably never.
And I think they were Queen Victoria, apparently with her German heritage, yeah, whatever, brought it over, didn't she?
That was the Christmas tree.
Ah, was
That's
it?
right, yeah.
Father Christmas is from America,
right?
And traditionally was somebody linked with nature and dressed in green. And this sounds bizarre, but it's true. Coca-Cola then put him in red.
Oh, wow.
Coca-Cola.
Oh, God. Commercialism.
Yeah. So we've got...
We'll have to put a warning on this chat so that children don't watch it. I think that's the crucial... You've just burst their bubble there.
No. The real Father Christmas has always been in red.
Ah, see.
Don't.
Although, Stan, Saint Nicholas is actually of Turkish heritage,
yes,
isn't
right.
he?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, we learn all these new things about what we think is, our heritage. And actually, when you dig deeper,
yeah,
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Isn't St. George Turkish as well? Isn't
he? Oh, my goodness.
Actually, it might be yes,
St. George,
I think both.
is Turkish.
Yes.
St. Nicholas, I think, is from either Norway, Sweden, somewhere like that.
Oh, it could be. Then I might be getting mixed up. Yeah. But yes, there is.
So yeah, and they're not as up. But what he finishes his article on in the Times is, but these connect us to older Christmases, and when you sing these songs and when you take part in these traditions, it's an anchor point, as you said, Frank, into something that's gone on for at least 150 years, if not longer, via that collection of songs. And his view is, let's hope we're not losing them now. Again, as he says, far too many, in his view, trite Christmas songs are sneaking into activities. And he doesn't. I don't think he's contradicting himself, because you could argue, well, if that's the case, then those songs in the 1800s were the modern songs. And he's not saying that. He's saying ones that haven't got the traditional stuff, because he actually says, if I doubt he'll ever get into a nativity, but was it New York?
Oh, yeah. The Pogues.
Yeah, the Pogues probably won't get into a nativity, but actually it is a song that reflects Christmas in some parts of the world and in some parts of society.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a traditionalist and a romantic, and Christmas is exhausting, but I love it.
Yeah. Sameena, what's caught your eye?
What's caught my eye is the Education Policy Institute report that was published yesterday on COVID-19 and disadvantaged pupils, and the impact that that's having on our children and young people. And there are a couple of things in there that I don't think it was surprising to find out that the gap has widened, from about 18 months to 2 years. Uh, but I think the other thing is the actual impact of poverty overall that's having on some of our families, and free school meal rates moving from 22% in 2019 to 27.6% in 2021, and I suspect that that's going to increase again when you look at what's actually happening at the moment. And I think that whole sort of call that they have, the two things that really struck me. One is around the really looking at those children and young people that are persistently
Yeah.
disadvantaged as
These are
opposed to
the
those that drip in and out.
yeah, these
That's
are
a
the ones with 80% free
yeah.
school meal claims, really, for their entire school life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and I think the other thing really is looking at how poverty is holistically impacting and adjusting, the pupil premium sort of amounts that we have at the moment. And but fundamentally, I think is actually having a poverty strategy that would support what schools do. Because at the moment, I've seen, as you were saying earlier, schools really going way beyond
Yeah.
the sort of educational responsibilities that they have. I was in a school earlier this week where there was, really doing all the food bank stuff and making sure they were signposting families, and that's brilliant, that they are doing that. But actually, where is our poverty strategy? We've got energy crisis and the cost of that. We've got food prices, spiraling out. And, we think of Maslow's hierarchy and children having the basics first so that they can learn. And so I think there's a lot in that report that I do generally like that report. Or the other thing that I do like in that report, is the fact that they do have an intersectional approach. They
Yeah.
don't just talk about disadvantage. They then look at different groups, which is what my book does, and look at how that impacts on special educational
Yeah.
needs, pupils with English as an additional language, those that, from certain minority ethnic groups that have a raw deal, because all of those groups have higher free school meal eligibility. And one of the things that I talk about is that intersectional approach. That's not just look at it in this binary way of disadvantage, but let's dig a little bit deeper and see what that actually means. And I think that the fact that they are able to share that data with us and also put some really good suggestions, I just hope that politicians listen, because it just seems bonkers that currently, we were used to talk about food. I mean, never even heard of food banks. It was for, probably the homeless at one point, and now it's just they're there and they're becoming used by more and more families as a first point of call, which for working families as well, which just doesn't seem right.
I think one of the things that I don't think many people realize is how difficult it is to get free school meals now.
Mm.
You have to be very poor,
Mm.
in
I
order to
saw
qualify for that.
I saw a
Yeah.
piece, it must have been an opinion piece, suggesting that instead of those indicators, we look at family income.
Mm.
Not, and so, it's not a case of, have I got these benefits that entitle me to claim free
Yeah.
school meals, but actually, what is the income to this family?
Yeah.
I think it'd be very difficult to do, but it would be a better indicator of poverty than somebody who can, get through the system well enough to be able to claim free school meals.
It's interesting. The
Yeah.
report was very clear that it was pointing out that the disadvantage gap was closing up to 2015.
Yes.
And then it didn't go into decline, but this, in effect, it didn't close any further. And actually now COVID, the pandemic has blown that out of the water. I mean, and actually today they announced a 5% increase in pupil premium funding. And as the report says, that's not eligible for students post 16, where FE has been badly hit in the settlement figure for education. as I said, early years, and one of the weaknesses I think in the report was that because it was only about 11 to 16 or 11 to 18.
It was.
But actually, I was suggesting, well, we need significant increases in funding for all of these children, that fall into these categories, because we know the families, we know them, before they start primary. We need to get that funding stream in. It's not all about funding, but it helps. It makes, you can make alternative arrangements, you can offer additional support. So I think I really like the report. I just wish they would, and they're not very good at letting us know that these reports are coming, because actually, if we knew as educationalists, if we knew these were coming, we could, and they actually offered more time to review the report before the release date, it'd be really helpful to coordinate everybody, to get into it and to have, to publicize it better. Okay.
But there's also, last week, Frank, we talked about, the social side of this, and a lot of this affects education, but it isn't purely educational. It's a social issue, and I was talking to somebody this week who runs a company doing alternative provision, and we were saying things like youth service, youth clubs. They went within 6 months from being a vibrant part of what life was like as a teenager to having no existence of that whatsoever. And I know his company have used youth clubs, etc., as part of their development of their business. But I remember when I first joined the advisory side of things in the local authority, the development of the youth service was an absolute priority, and lots of money was going into it, new hubs for students and everything. And then it just stopped. And all starting. There has to be a connection between what goes on in society and how we treat our people aged between 12 and 18.
I think
even things stand. Sorry, I was just going to say that even swimming pools and stuff, they're shutting down because they can't afford to heat. That's just basic things that we've taken for granted, that anybody can go and access and, swim if they want to. That's going to have massive repercussions because it's just not affordable anymore.
No.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, what's caught my eye was the Ofsted annual report, which came out on Tuesday. They always come out on Tuesdays. And as somebody who's written, I think I did 3 education sections, also did ITE and various other things for previous reports, I was really shocked that shocked and I suppose disappointed that the annual report, the big message from the annual report in terms of education was the recruitment and retention crisis that's facing schools. Now, any of us who are connected with schools know this is a problem. You've spoken about it today, Sameena, about MFL. We know that the figures have been poor for a number of years about the targets for the number of, say, physics teachers that we need, and how short we are in that regard. But sadly, I read probably about 50 Ofsted reports a week. I just go through and I take a different phase. So it might be primary, it might be special. Even I look at independents, to be honest, the regulatory ones. I have not read anything about the problems of recruitment and retention in school inspection reports. I've read a lot about problems with the curriculum, not having sufficient expertise, children not being able to recall some bit of facts or something which have been used to sort of take down a judgment or two. And I'm thinking, well, where's that evidence come from? And for those of you who don't know, well, it may be different now. When I was asked to draft these reports, you get all. I was connected with the data team in Ofsted, and actually I was given a minder, who actually, as I drafted sections, challenged me as to where the evidence was for this. And it's very frustrating, but really useful, because most of the time the evidence was there, but I can remember a couple of points that I made where it wasn't enough evidence. Well, where's the evidence? If inspectors are going into schools
Yes.
to share the information with parents about these are the issues, these are the big issues that the school's facing, and not once are they reporting on the recruitment and retention issues in schools. I'm thinking, you're not doing the job properly, are you? You know, you're so driven by a curriculum focus, which it seems to have been, that actually that's overtaken your thinking about what are the big issues here. So it just sort of made me feel disappointed that we've reached a point where you can basically go and do thousands of inspections and not draw on the evidence that that's telling you, because you've actually convinced inspectors that the curriculum is more important than the recruitment issue.
Yeah, and I'd sort of reiterate that, Frank, from the other side, because obviously I support lots of my schools when Ofsted come, and we've had quite a few since the new Ofsted inspection framework, and those questions aren't even being asked. So if they're not being asked, head teachers may actually, they obviously put it down in their SEF in terms
Yes.
of the context of the school. And we know, especially when you want subject specialists, you know, but if you haven't got the right teachers there, and we know teachers are the most important thing in terms of, you know, impacting on education, but if it's not even being asked or considered, and it's not being written in the evaluation form, it doesn't then translate into the reports. And the other thing is, the reports are so short.
Yeah.
Even what they do cover, it doesn't really capture it. And I'm not saying there should be big tomes, but actually it is, as they say, you know, written for parents, but it doesn't really say much. And I think over the years the quality of the reports have declined considerably, so you don't pick up even the specific issues about the school, but never mind about the bigger issues.
I would strongly argue for a professional document for the school and the summary
Yes.
parents again. Because at the moment, I mean, I was talking to an inspector this week, and she was saying the feedback is the feedback to senior managers is where you need to record everything, because the professional stuff's there. But that's not good enough. If it's there,
Yeah.
it's not a big step to say, well, put it in writing, and then the school's got
Yeah.
something to
The,
work
the,
with.
the issue there, Stan, is the people that are determining that approach have never sat as a head teacher or a senior leadership team at the
Yeah.
end of 2 days where you're on the
Yeah.
edge of RI, special measures or good. And actually, when you get the judgment, if it's good, there's that, oh, you don't really care
Yeah.
what follows. And if you
No.
get the RI expecting it to be good, you then get into this sort of
Yeah.
mindset of, oh, what does that mean? You're not thinking about the
No,
dialogue.
I agree, Frank. And even when we used to do feedback, I used to do
Mm.
feedback to people at the end of an inspection. I would say to them, look, within this, and the word was unsatisfactory there, you're going to hear the word unsatisfactory, but don't let that then cloud your vision for the rest of the stuff that you're going to hear. But, I was absolutely clear that once that word was out, nothing else went
No.
into the head. And I've seen where people have had somebody else in to take minutes and stuff, but it's not the same as a professional document that you can refer to later and say these were the issues that were raised and the detail behind them, and this is how we've addressed it.
As it's slagging off Ofsted week, but also we're gonna have another
Well,
one. But no,
I'm not slagging them off. I just think
but
it's
an
no
MP,
longer a professional document.
an MP spoke in Parliament this week,
Yeah.
about their child's Ofsted report, which they didn't agree with, and lo and behold, they've now got a meeting with the chief inspector. What's that about?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I imagine that every single head teacher who feels aggrieved also wants that conversation with the, why not? You know, and was it the TES who said, oh, so there's a VIP lane towards the chief inspector. You know, this is very easy journalism, isn't it? But it's so bloody obvious what they're doing. They're laying themselves wide open about this sort of cronyism, sitting basically together to decide. You know, it loses all that independence for me. And I think that's where we've that's where we've gone with inspection. It's been not prejudged, but driven too far down narrow lanes.
So if one person, because of their position, can get a conversation about an inspection with the chief inspector, where does without fear or favour fit in?
I suppose the chief inspector would say, I'm just doing it to explain the fear and favour element of it. But anyway, right. And Sameena, I don't know, because I didn't warn you at the beginning before we started recording about Room 101. Have you?
Yes,
Ah, so you've thought about, because I was thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to land Sameena in it here. But have you got something that goes into room 101?
it's a biggie. I have. And
Oh,
what I
yeah.
would I
Bracing
would
yourself
like
now.
is for educational policy and strategy to be taken out of the hands of politicians. And I think it should be cross-party commission organization that has people that work on the ground as well, not just the good and the great that we always get, that actually comes up with at least a 10-year strategy for education that's that would be focused on. So I'm actually taking it a little bit further, more
Go on.
collaboration in the
Yeah,
system, really focused on the place and people working, say, at a ward or at a local authority level or, city, region, and then even a region level, really looking at what issues are pertinent to them and having a strategy that's going to have impact with decent funding. And one of the things that I've been going on for a long time, obviously I do talk about vulnerable groups, and that's my sort of, passion and how we can make things better for them. But also the north-south divide in certain regions. So, I'm based in Yorkshire and Humber, and, results there's lots of reasons why the results are what they are,
yeah,
but where is the sort of strategy to address that? And actually, in the past, talking about Ofsted, I've raised that with Ofsted, saying when you're writing your reports, there's no mention of some of the issues faced in the regions. It's a very monolithic,
it is.
report. So where the nuances about what we need to do at
Absolutely.
particular regional and sort of city level to address those issues. If we're really sincere about making improvements, we've got to do that.
Yeah, and I.
Well, you're talking to one of Frank's favourite subjects there. When Frank and I first started putting the world to rights many years ago, the one thing we were consistent about was a geographical area inspection of
Yeah.
all services to say
Yeah.
what's it like to live here and how can
Mhm.
it get better.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, I agree with you, Samina. It does also require devolution of funding. Funding's got to come
Indeed.
locally, and at the moment, there's too much jumping through the hoops, and local authorities and groups bidding for scarce resources. That's no
I
way
agree.
to run, strategically to run an improvement, to tackle poverty, to tackle levelling up. That's not the way
Mhm.
to do it. I
No.
mean, can we finish on this? I live in Cheadle-Hulme. It's a prosperous area of South Manchester. We have a Conservative MP who this is, and it's a marginal seat, so it flicks from Lib Dem to Conservative. We are quite a wealthy area, but in the Towns Fund, this area, which I think out of the 350 areas was 325th least deprived. So we got 25 million pounds for a new railway station in Cheadle, and I think it was Barnsley, but now I think,
Yeah.
well, hang on, this is simply not right, is it? And that's not, and that this is a sort of just this bidding war that's going
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also the suggestion. It may not be right, but you just get that feeling that it'd be very helpful for the local Tory MP to have that 25 million. It'd be very helpful for the community. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but actually, if you're looking at priorities, this doesn't seem to be the way to do it.
Mhm.
I think, Frank, anywhere where bids have to go in become inherently unfair, because what you're saying is the people who can write the best bids, not the
Yeah,
people who need that support the
Yeah.
most, are the ones that
Yeah.
get the
yeah.
funding.
Hey, can I just say that's over 40 odd minutes. So this is one of the longest chats we've had. So, Sameena, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you as a
Yeah,
guest this week.
fantastic.
Well, thank you.
And we'd love you to come back. We say that to every guest, and I'll be in touch with you to try and get another date towards the end of next year, if that's all right.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure chatting to you, and we're one more Frankenstein chat before Christmas and before the end of the year. And next week we've got Eric Craven, the sort of colleague who was a former HMI SEND specialist, who's a bit of a poet now. So he's coming back next week, Stan. So we've got him for Christmas. So anyway, Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you all next week for our final edition of 2022. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.